I'm going to talk about very similar subject matter. And man, I just got rid of a lot of waste. It's day 12 and big purge, big adjustment. I was on, so all month I've pretty much been doing ketogenic. Last month, all through June. And I came back to a place where it fucked up every bit of my my progress. And you have to begin to see, okay, you said progress, aren't you trying to lose weight? And it's like, yeah, that's progress. And it's kind of like, if I was an athlete trying to maintain my weight, I would be subverting, right, to catabolism. And we have to get out of this mindset. We have to go toward anabolism, or staying in an anabolic state of growth. So if I'm really being accurate, if I'm maintaining my weight and I'm gaining muscle and I'm losing fat, that's the primary area that people aren't considering or looking at, that needs to be focused on. And that's performance first. Right? So many people, such as myself, I've done this, where if you want to lose weight, you can look like you just came out of I don't want to be callous and say concentration camp, but you're putting yourself into a camp where, yeah, the stomach is still bothering me, but my system's purging out. And everything's focused around protein. This is the most misunderstood aspect to these diets, and why these fad diets get so much support, because people want it now, right? They're too busy. They're busy, and they want everything just delivered to them. And ultimately, that's what the pharmaceutical industry is running off of, why it even quasi exists in a held state that has no principles, and people are always voting for this. They're voting for, yeah, we vote for government instead of self-governing and self-correcting, right? So there's nothing wrong with the postulation of going and eating blueberries, algae. I got to look into that and maybe try to put that on my list. Nori, that's something you can easily get in. You just get those little sheets and you're taking in the iodine, right? That'll be a really good time to. So you need to focus in on principles first, or the foods that you're eating are primarily focusing on bolstering nutrients. And then you sort of meander and migrate into the next phase. So we'll be finishing this up in the coming days and going into a sugar diet. And what I want to bridge, going from, like if I just went directly from eating high fat, moderate to high protein, I feel better when I'm taking protein in, because I'm trying to build, and that's the whole point. But the same holds true with any diet, is that aren't you trying to build up your stores? Well, don't you understand that that's an anabolic state? You're not going to be able to build up. Like we think in our minds, right? Like the inception into the cell, the permeability of the cell, right? The priming and the sparking of insulin, the fact that exercise acts as insulin, we're forcing nutrients into the cell, and we're trying to do this globally throughout our entire body systemically, right? And we're trying to stay as insulin sensitive as we can. So one could say that when you're truly looking at metabolic function, and people are always stupefied by this, right? Where it's like, I thought that taking fat and protein in, right, were going to allow me to take in fat-soluble vitamins, which they do, right? But the primary purpose is that your body is expecting an ebb and flow that is seasonally based, and everyone likes to push back against this. They love to rail against this. They get so in this control mechanism where they think that they are the God and the purveyor of all things everywhere all the time. We're sunk into these cycles, whether we like it or not. And once we integrate ourselves in and we see my body knows cyclically, calendrically, zodiacally where I am in the cycle, right? It's time to focus on certain nutrients, right? And if protein is always there, right, when you're building up and those constituents are available, then as you're going into a catabolic function and you're beginning to burn off the visceral fat, which a lot of the organ fat, the fatty liver, that's considered under the same mechanisms, right? Where your body prefers to burn fat from certain areas through a certain pecking order, right? And obviously this is based on whether or not you got 30 billion fat cells, right? Or adipose tissue, or 100. Like obese people have 100 billion fat cells, but then you can work toward the brown and beige fat. And they're really experimenting a lot with beige fat right now, as far as cancer treatments and so forth. Like, what if you could turn all adipose tissue in a non-trained individual that is now adhering to an exercise program, or maybe you could bypass the exercise program altogether and create these physiological functions, right, through electrical stimulus. And then, you know, you have these sort of double-muscled babies, right, test tube babies that were never came from a womb, and they are given a superior method or methodology, and supposedly this is the type of stuff that's been happening and has happened. What if this master race was something that we progenerated and brought back? What if they're clumsy and they don't quite know because they aren't tapped into their own origin? Like, what if Prometheus, that movie, what if Prometheus came from us? Like, the whole thing ended, everything, and then human beings happened to survive because of our machinating ways, because we are these snide Machiavelli thinkers, right? And we managed to stay alive, that we somehow progenerated and brought back, ironically, what we came from. Even creating a dichotomy with from a philosophical notion going into the theology that we would never be able to return back, and we never came from it. That we're hearkening back a memory that doesn't cross-correlate to who we are. It doesn't represent the character of what we really are at the base. We have to remind ourselves of that. I do it quite often, I'm like, look, this is who you think you are when you're studying this person or this work. This is what you think that they would think about you. But the truth is, if you're really honest with it about it, they're looking at you in a superficial way, and they wouldn't even, most of these people, like if you were to come face to face with even the people that you hold in high regard, and you know that you understand them and you'd be able to talk to them and have dialogue, and they might look at you from a populist perspective and go, you're a stalker, I don't even like you. And then that rejection sets off, like this is, I think, something that Cliff High is battling with, but I think he always wanted to have that type of attention, that sort of rock star attention. He sees himself as a rock star. He sees himself as a genius. Like, these people build up such an illusion, and then they get a whole troop of people following them, and then pretty soon it's an army, and they're going, that's not what I wanted. And it's like, yeah, you did. You were always in denial of it. And you live in a time right now where if you can presuppose yourself as some sort of mock-up genius, and you can extend some sort of system of borrowed parts. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, right? That's a trip. That's a trip. And I mean, her husband was the real creator there. And you could say that she filtered and sort of ripped off. But it was like, it really was a study of the existential. You know, it wasn't poetic, but it was. It was like a very bland and basic mock-up of what would happen once you have this dead flesh. It was a study of techne, art and technology. That's what Frankenstein, the posit of Frankenstein is and was. Right? Yeah, my stomach is still really bothering me. And I'm just my system's clearing out. So what works as a bridge between these various diets is the protein only. This is the one thing this is the hardest thing to go into, the most important, the most fundamental, the least rewarding, requires the most will, is going into a protein standalone. That is the fucking hardest diet, and I did that for long periods of time. And then I would supercharge it by doing what really is essentially being called the snake diet. But how I treated the snake diet is I would eat and gorge on. Eventually, what I gorged on is very high quality nutrition that I baked in a clay pot. That was primarily vegetable based, or I would go out for a really fresh, high quality salad, right? That just had, I remember there was this place called Pluto's around the Bay Area there, South Bay. And you could go in there and just pick things out almost like Chipotle, but it was all organic and fresh. And I would put every single vegetable in there, and I would just be like chowing down on it, man. And if I wanted to, I would add a lean cut of protein in there, because you could do red meat, or you could do like a turkey or something like that. It was a great place. I don't know if it's even functioning anymore, but it was over there in Palo Alto. And so that would be something where I would, and then I kind of played around with soups a little bit, another low density, even more low density, to where you can cook rice in with water. This is kind of something that Asian people do, especially when they want to diet, and they'll cook a smaller amount of vegetables in a pot on the stove together, and they may add a little Korean hot sauce or whatever, and they'll make a nice stew. And then if you think about this as a platform or a base, you know, as you're losing that weight, you're filling up a little less on water, or around the summertime when you need to have that hydration and you're having that stew, you might, or soup, it turns kind of more into a stew where you might add dumplings later that are filled with vegetables. And then you might add dumplings that are filled with a little more protein and even more fat at certain times, right? So you're just changing the variable and you're going by your body, right? So you could take a seasonal diet, and people used to focus in on this, where they would just focus in on soups, right into stews, right? A stew, it's depicted as something you eat in the wintertime, rightly. A nice hearty lamb stew, right? Where you have the vegetables mixed in there. I don't agree with people who talk about beans in a negative way, even though there's a lot of people in the dietary world, the dietary community, that look poorly on beans. I think your body has to work for, this is what drives, like, to me, these people aren't getting it, and they're oftentimes much younger. They're just looking at the text and then they're following the popular narrative, but your body has to search for the amino acids. Your body prioritizes the amino acids. It's so fundamental. And on a superficial scale, when you're just looking at the acute effects, you're like, no, it wants to create ATP. It wants to convert, it's looking for glucose. It's going to find any way that it can, whether it's gluconeogenesis, glycolysis first, right? Or, when they start to posit why and what makes so they're thinking, they're playing their cards, they're showing their cards. When they say that from glycolysis, from the sugar diet perspective, right, that it's provingly showing a prioritization where then the body starts to burn body fat, right? It's going through so much glucose. It has plenty of glycogen, your liver and your blood system and your muscles, right? And the answer is grow bigger muscles, right? This is why the sugar diet works with people on PEDs. This smart smelly bellow was like, let's compare TRT to steroids. And it's like, TRT is a steroid? Like, there's this posit or postulation. What he's really trying to convey is, let's look at where doctors say your free testosterone should be. And now let's look at, what was it, the testosterone syndrome? I read that book. It talked about that. And then it got more into the aromatization aspects of this, what letrozole and arimidex and doing different PCT drugs is really all about. And really, if you were to really base an entire nutrition program just around PCT drugs and then expound upon how do we spark the HPTA to do better work, right? People aren't looking at the kidneys and kidney function nearly hard enough, right? Because this is sort of this backward engineering of what is propagating what we do, our behavior when we get up, right? Our bladder. I put things up about Eeks Akers. I feel terrible for that guy, but I also don't see him trying different diets out. And I know he's on YouTube all the time because he's posting up. And at least he's posting up to YouTube all the time, right? And I really hope he finds it, but your body is going to do its best to get into sync and to start to make something out of whatever you're giving it, right? And I mean, the ketotic diet is the weirdest diet. It really is. But it does work, and it works long term. And when you go off of it, you know it. So the bridge is going into protein as a standalone. So I've got all those tools coming just in a matter of days. In about four days, I'll be implementing in. I'll be doing the shopping, and I'll be implementing in a transition. So we'll be a little bit beyond. So, I mean, you could say it took me a few days to start getting back into ketosis. And whatever was in my system is flushed out of it now. There's something kind of like sitting in my system. There was an obstruction, and it's gone. It's cleared out now. Sometimes it takes a couple weeks to factor it through with this diet. So you could say that, the first few days. So in 2 days, I'll be coming up on exactly 2 weeks. I sunk into ketosis very quickly because I've been driving it with training. I primed my system with fat by going back to, so for the first week or plus, even today. And throughout the last 2 weeks, I've been following up black tea and coffee with butter and heavy cream. I say butter and heavy cream because there was predominantly more butter than cream in there. And I was doing that just to make sure that I was taking in more fat. And it works. I've done it. I've shown the physique here on this channel that I came up with on a gluconeogenic diet that was really forcing myself into gluconeogenesis all the time. It very low fat, very low, if any, and very low, if any, carbohydrates. Like enough for a couple moles here and there to just kick it off, right? Workouts are hard. Thinking is hard. But the primary aspect that people are missing, again, is the driving force of orthomolecular nutrition, having a nitrogen-rich atmosphere all the time, and taking the nutrients and the micronutrients in for those amino acid conversions. And I proved to myself, and obviously the people around me, that by doing a protein standalone, I mean, you've got to go into this eventually every single hour you're doing it. It's exactly like Durian Ryder with his sugar diet. He's constantly going back to mostly fructose, right? Fructose glucose mixture, but he's going back to fruits, you know? And then he has his rice. And he's showing that he can go around the world and do this. But did he take his PEDs along? Did he take his testosterone along? It is a performance enhancement drug. Just because you say something like what Mark Smellybell was saying, you know, TRT or steroids, it's kind of like you're on steroids just because you're limiting it and capping it, right? And this gets into the testosterone syndrome where there are different modes of administration, right? And you could almost look at it like you're taking test suspension. So, I mean, how do you peak out your testosterone if you were on a test, an anthate, versus a test, cypionate, which is going to bloat the hell out of somebody, right? And it's this long acting. And then the enanthate is a mid acting. And then the test suspension is like just acute. So why does test suspension even exist, you know? So you would you would look at your circadian rhythm. You would look at your meals. You would assist your body in taking certain test suspension shots. And that is how you begin to stack up the AAS program, right? And then when you're coming off of it, Proviron will keep the muscles hard. One could even say, if you're transitioning this into performance, that a halotestin, right, that's more used for fighters, mixed martial artists, and so forth, that goes in a totally different direction. Because then you're kind of working, again, to understand that the adrenals are just sitting right there above your kidneys is a fundamental thing that people are missing, among others, right? Keeping the thyroid doing its job and balancing things out appropriately, properly. And we'll get the air. It's getting a little musty in here. And like right now, I am so casual. My walk is so casual. And obviously I'm just taking my time. And I'm trying to show you that this sort of casual walk, when you're doing this all day and you base this, that your diet is structured in such a way where you're layering your diet, that your nutrition plan is structured in such a way that cross-correlates to your sleep, your circadian rhythm. Everything is layered on top of one another to where you can superimpose a pyramid with your behaviors, and you're like, you see how well sunk in this is. And then when you think you're doing the antithetical, you're going on a sugar-based diet or a carbohydrate-centric diet, all you have to do is flip it upside down and realize, you know, that's what I did with the Skeleton City pyramid. As I go, these diets merge, right? And really, what works in the center of these diets, again, is gluconeogenesis and protein as a standalone. Then you start to realize that this world of protein is just like the rest of these. You have these complex carbohydrates, you have the monosaccharides, You sort of have these mid-acting that have a little bit more fiber, right? But essentially, it's just like protein, where you have this casein protein, you have this more microfiltered type protein, you have the hydrolyzed protein. What's the end result? The muscle nitrogen, right? When you get to the hydrolyzed state, and there's that final breakdown process to amino acids, it can't turn back at that point. It can't be used as fuel. And that's a critical thing that people are doing incorrectly. And one could say what would save your kidneys, this is an argument for the sugar diet, is to say if you're having any renal issues, and if you're especially having adrenaline renal issues, which oftentimes interplay with this aggressive behavior that a lot of these people are manifesting, and why I think they go on the sugar diet, because it just mellows them out. It gives them what they want, right? It allows you to produce more serotonin. Your brain runs off like 66% glucose, right? And I would be interested to see what happens, with cancer treatments with the sugar diet, because they're telling you go the other way. Shut it all off. Shut off the glutamine, right? But what if you were self-regulating, right, with a diet like this, by using your will, right, and you're eating a lot of fruits and so forth, and with exercise, you're driving the apoptosis and autophagy, right? Would you be able to retrain your body cells to, purge out the cancerous cells as it is? Obviously, a lot of this data is sadly collected from people who meet the realization the hard way, but when the doctors sign them up for programs, they're able to initiate a protocol that works for a majority of people, and that's how they're really looking in and finding, and then obviously rat mouse studies, laboratory experiments. And the thing about glutamine is a very revealing one, that cancer cells can thrive off glutamine without the presence of oxygen or carbohydrate, glucose. They can thrive off glutamine. So this is primarily proves a function. When you get into dysfunction, right, is that to correct and stay alive, these standalone diets might not only be something that we go into pretty regularly, but are an aspect of our evolutionary path, right? And it's almost becoming undeniable that these type of standalone focused, that it really is like a PED, as they say. It's more like a performance enhancement drug. Like you will never feel more high in your entire life than when you eat carbohydrates after you've been staying off carbohydrates for weeks at a time. Once you get past like 2 or 3 weeks, the effects are very negative if you're just in gluconeogenesis. I mean, you can trick it, you can flit in and out of it, but I've been to the point where I had nothing but protein powder, and eventually you start dropping weight, you lose your appetite, you gain deficiencies, and you're fucking up. And then you're gorging and you're putting on all this weight, and your fucking results are just gone, But your body still remembers. And when you really apply yourself and apply your will and take yourself through the rigors, and that's why the essential aspect to this is, no matter what your metabolic function is, show your body that it has to move, that it has to go through this human movement pattern, right? Show your body that it has to exercise, that the exercise is like fundamental to the cause, right? Block that out a little bit. Yeah, that's better. And so oxidative stress, number one. Taking in that vitamin C, regulating your bowel movements, regulating your behavior, regulating your immune system, number one. Vitamin C at the upper level and the tolerance of it, very important to run no matter what diet you're on. Magnesium supplementation, extremely important. If you're doing something to naturally bring your testosterone up, you can run that anytime, all the time, no matter what diet you're on. Boron, electrolytes, that's uncompromisable. Look at the things that are the constants first. Then understand that if these things need to be focused on first, what do? They synergize and catalyze the amino acids to be able to do their job. The protein always comes first. But when you get closer at it and you're answering the question of how does protein come first, and I've broken that down. I've broken that down many times, where you have more of an anabolic or androgenic aspect to steroidogenesis, and then you've got a more cortical aspect to it. And it really is propagated by your behavior. But if I'm walking, that is a mid-grade behavior, right? My body will know when it's nighttime through the circadian rhythm and the fact that there's an affirmation with the aromatic amino acids in my ocular center to say it's becoming nighttime. We need to boost up the melatonin. And there's that trigger that goes in, right? And that very much acts from a dopamine center and then on into, that's when, if you're producing too much cortisol in your system, it will disturb your sleep. If your adrenals are going crazy, if your kidneys are not at rest, right? So a lot of this, when you start to sip on hot water, you're flushing your system out, you're giving yourself gastric emptying, you're staying away from nightshade foods, regardless of what, your parents told you to eat some pasta, stay away from those tomatoes, stay away from eggplant, stay away from anything that's nightshade, that's going to be hard on your body. Stay away from cabbage at that